No matter who you are or where you are in life's journey, you're welcome here. We keep stressing this slogan. It's our mantra. We repeat it over and over again. We want it to be true for this congregation in this valley. We want it to be true that no matter how you look like, no matter how you love, no matter how old you are, that there's a place for you in this community of God's people. And that brings with it the problem that might actually happen. There might actually be different people at the same time in the same room. They might do different things. They might believe different things. They may not be all the same. Look around you. You all look the same? Look around you. Are you all the same age? Are you all the same gender? Do you all love the same way? No, you don't. All too often, church expects people to be alike. To be the same, to do the same, or to believe the same. And the early church wasn't any different. The early church was just a little sect within Judaism where everybody pretty much knew what one was supposed to do. You circumcised your little boys. You ate kosher. You went to the synagogue on the Sabbath. Oh yeah, and now that we're Christian, we also, the first day of the week, we get together again for our little Jesus thing there. That's what Christianity was in the beginning. They were all the same. They did the same thing. They had the same culture, the same language. They knew what to do. They were one, literally. They had that expectation to be, do, and believe the same things. Now that has really not worked for too long. Pretty soon, people of Roman descent entered the church. Greeks, and Romans, and people that were not of God's people. And the man, they weren't even circumcised. So now, within the one church that is just a Jewish sect, you now had uncircumcised and circumcised men at the same time. They weren't the same anymore. Being the same in that one body didn't work anymore as soon as the church crossed that one boundary. That's when groups change. That's when the church changed to a point where we don't even tell you what to eat or what to drink or what not to eat or what not to drink. What God has proclaimed sacred and pure, you shall not call profane, is what Peter says. It doesn't matter what you eat. It doesn't matter what you drink. It doesn't matter what you do. Most people wouldn't think that that is a big thing. But around here it is. Yes, coffee and beer are okay. That's our message in this valley. Here's a sign of faith to say our God believes that everything is sacred as any other thing. And as such, we gather around people that are like us, interestingly enough. In the early church, everybody was expected to do the same thing. They all were supposed to follow the rules of cleanliness, to eat kosher as the code commanded. We don't do that. But we do have signs that distinguish us from those around us. People like us wear necklaces with crosses around their necks. We look different. We wear our own little signs of identity and witness. We don't all do the same, but we do things a little differently. And that expectation to believe the same things, well, we're too biblical for that. The Bible is so full of so many different names for God, we wouldn't settle for one. Limiting God to that Father image, we'd never go with that. When the psalm calls God a mother hen protecting her children, I hear God saying, quack. Not just a man, also a mother, or a donkey, or a chicken, or a bear, or a woman, or a spirit. God has so many names. We wouldn't limit God to one. How do they say? In essentials, unity. In non-essentials, liberty. In all things, charity. Maybe. We'll look at that later. But believing one thing for an entire church makes no sense. God turns those values upside down. Whenever the church pretends it needs to be, do, or believe the same thing, God takes that and turns it upside down. God has always changed things that people thought were solid. For thousands of years, God's people knew that they were God's people and only they were God's people. And all of a sudden, here comes this new movement that says, no, God's love is ever expanding. Not only one people, but all the peoples. Gentiles, non-Jews, now also part of God's covenant. Love just like God's first love. Now God establishes this covenant with Jews and Gentiles alike. With that one church of Jews and Gentiles, really a mixed bag. What God has made clean, you must not call profane. When were those things distinguished, separated? When Israel didn't know how to survive with its identity. That was during the exile, when Israel was in Babylon, surrounded by a majority that wasn't like them. How do you keep your little clique together? You teach your kids, we're the ones that worship on Saturdays. You tell them we eat clean stuff. We circumcise our little boys on the 8th day. You create those signs that make your group unique as a marker, as a sign of identity. Never were they intended to be perverted into signs of discrimination. Part of God's people, not part of God's people. Being part of God's people means to be ever inclusive. So our ministry is to celebrate diversity, not to be the same. We're not striving to be one. We're striving to celebrate diversity. That is why, as a congregation, we worked hard towards becoming open and affirming, and that means that we welcome all the people of different sexualities, of different ages, of different cultural backgrounds, from different religious upbringings. It's not about being the same. And we are here to listen to what God calls us to do. We're not here to do the same thing. But we are here to listen together to what God calls us to do. And God calls us all in different ways. We're not pulling all in the same direction. We're not a coherent movement that has one purpose. No. We're here to be open to listen to what God calls us to do in every moment. Some help participating in worship. Some host fellowship. Others help with spiritual growth and Sunday school and whatnot. Others engage in mission and outreach. Many different things. We don't do one thing. We do God's thing. And we're called to believe in God's extravagant welcome. Extravagant means bigger than our hearts would be. We're not here to believe the same. But we're here to believe that there's room in God's heart for all of us. So that distinction between essentials and non-essentials, where there needs to be unity or there's room for diversity, how are we supposed to have that kind of unity? Well, we try and unite our voices on certain occasions. According to our bylaws, you'll find that the United Church of Christ Statement of Faith is one guideline that we look at. You find that in the bulletin. We'll say that later on. But when we do that in a spirit of it being a testimony of faith. A testimony, not a test. You don't have to believe all those words. You don't have to know all those words. We don't all agree on those words. But for that one brief moment, we share our voices and join them. And you will find that there's not only one creed in our book. There are many, many traditional ones, newer ones. We join our voices in many different forms. So what are the essentials and the non-essentials where unity is needed or not? We don't have that discussion. It wouldn't lead anywhere. The distinction of essentials and non-essentials in faith, that doesn't even apply to us. No one should stand up and tell us that part of your faith is non-essential. That part of your faith is essential. And we have to agree on that, but not on this. Who makes those decisions for us? No one. The one thing that really makes sense is that God's love knows no limits. And only the last thing can be true: in all things charity. Amen.